This should be the final little film wrap-up for this project, unless we encounter something new along the way. You had settled on the scissor truss ceiling, so first I think the highest that we're going to get that upper chord, based on all my dimensions anyway, is about 3 11/16 to 12. And once everything was said and done in terms of the column spacing, my calculations and feedback from the program indicates that we can use two 7 1/4 inch LVLs at these margins. The only other thing I want to say about that, getting that beam down to 7 1/4 inches, a couple 7 1/4 inch LVLs, allowing for that higher heel, and hopefully accomplishing the best scissor truss we can, is that two of those, there's really quite a bit of deflection here over just that 10-foot span. This is almost 3/8 of an inch here. So if you might be inclined to upgrade to 3 of those, it'd be about another $250 to do that, but it does improve those deflection numbers pretty substantially. Nevertheless, the 7 1/4 does pass, and I guess for that I calculated 853 total reaction pounds per end of the trusses. So if you get more than that back from your truss people, we probably ought to get together. And 640 pounds per lineal foot is what I ran in terms of the load on this beam with these spans and supports as shown in the latest plans. Returning to this scissor truss though, if you do manage to get the 3.68 on the top chord, these are some quick variations with these 7 1/4 inch LVLs here of what you could probably maybe get by with on the lower chord. That is probably the best case scenario, and also showing you the resultant room heights. I settled, this is what one would expect, half of the top chord at the lower chord. That looks a little low for me, so I am hoping that this can be accomplished to a 3 11 over 2 1/4 for the truss, something like this. This is what I came up with for the final dimensions, the final hopeful dimensions based on my 7 1/4 inch beams, your inside and outside heel, your lower truss height, and your net truss height. 2 1/4 12, under 3 11/16 12, and I think that's about 17 degrees over 10 degrees. And I'll just cover this now very briefly. The main idea of the floor plan and the foundation plans as you find them and when you try to put this together is that the outside of this north beam finish is to finish flush with the outside of that 1-inch thick corner board over there, and that corner board is going to be increased to 7.5 or so wide in alignment with this projecting beam here on that face. I expect that you will get those 1-inch, you're going to need that 1-inch thick lumber as corner boards, two of those 7.5-inch pieces, both here and here. One to align up underneath this beam here that comes down on that corner board, and one here, and we want those corner boards the same thickness as all these battens. So because there has to be renovations here and here as we lift this ceiling, my suggestion or my solution for this is to take off all of the original siding here, keep these battens and reuse them where possible, cut some of this up for your new 1-inch thick corner boards, and then redo this entire base, either in just straight 7/8 thick cedar over plywood or whatever's there, or maybe some sort of cedar plywood. But I don't know how you seam that correctly. But that is my solution for this area here, and I just wanted to tell you that. Again, the main part of that is that these beams align with your wall framing there and your wall framing here, and we want these outside of these finished beams On this side we want it to just finish right flush with the corner board, and on this side we want it to finish flush with the corner board and battens on that north end. I'm pretty sure that ends the complex part of this film and the long-winded part, but that was the critical part of that whole plan when you get ready to execute it. Some of this was put together immediately after I sent you the first film, and this was dealing with that open end, or what we were going to do with that open end. We now know that we're not going to have that wall section across there in any event, and so this was looking at some alternative treatments for that end, and this was before I knew that this ceiling was going to be stained. It's tongue and groove like this, but stained. But so some of this was just quick looks at ceiling treatments in terms of that. After talking with Carl, I learned that this false beam here to bring cable and provide a place for fans and etc. is going to be installed. I'm not sure if Carl does these as mitered. I don't think he does these ones as mitered, so I'm assuming this one is put together similar to these. And so the challenge for me, or the question for me, became how to terminate that at the end, given what we also have going on out there. But in terms of the inside treatment, this is how I settled this end with a king post looking thing at that end, and I was playing with its height here, and the final drawings reflect where I would put it. This is one of these ceilings is close to a representation of what it'll feel like out there. I don't think you have that kind of long view, but this was the best I could find to give you what it's going to feel like out there. You will notice in these, by the way, I have finally, after much consternation, etc., this is what I settled, is bringing this margin here out to the edge of these 16-inch concrete pedestals. And from this end, then, this was where I had begun before I got with you, and this maintained that wall, that gable wall across there. This was a simple thing that lifted it without any beam at that top, but again, you would have to have blocks for your fans or whatever, and all this is some 1 5/8 rough sawn cedar with the ceiling material, the stained ceiling material, dying into that, butting into that, and then this flushing out with your battens out here. By the way, those LVLs, it's up to you, but if you want to leave at least you would just need a single LVL continuing out to pick up this fly rafter here. That's been accounted for, and it's probably the easiest way to do that. This was thickening that, and I didn't like that at all, and quickly moved away from that whole idea, as well as these kind of almost church looking things. And then this is pretty much, you can see here that I also extend that concrete, because that is on the west end, so there's going to be a substantial blow in of rain anyway. So I'm extending this concrete out, I believe, at least to the edge of this roof, maybe 1 inch or 2 past that. You can discuss that with your builder as that goes along. This, though, is how I finally treated this end, and I'll show you the little quick series of how that was arrived at. I never made one from out here with the lighter ceiling, though. I was wrong. There is one more critical part, and long-winded probably, but this is with regard to the placement of these columns and the location of these columns from east to west. The last technical part was the placement of these beams from north and south. And in terms of the alignment of these, or where these columns are actually placed and how that's called out. First of all, I had run into some trouble. This did not look right, stopping the concrete back here. But bringing it out here, I really worried about this little scrap in here, as well as this little scrap in here. So I didn't like that. Additionally, because people are going to be approaching these stairs from up top and down bottom on the regular, I feel like this misalignment here, where one side is about 16 inches, one side's about 12 inches, is going to be picked up. And I'm not sure what I ended up with solves the concrete issue, but I am sure that this is how these columns ought to be located, is based upon these stairs, with this first one at 1'4" off that edge, and this one 1'4", not 12, 1'4" off of this edge. And once that's done, once those two are located that way, that locates these two, and you end up with a wider dimension here. Whatever that dimension is calls out the width of this here, moving that back to also 9'10", and then this column calls out that location there, and whatever you end up with here is what you end up with. And you can see it actually divides, moving this one back a little bit, actually divides this wall a little better, and you don't even pick up that that this one's 6 or 7 inches shorter than these two. But you would definitely pick up, approaching from that south end, the offsetting of that left column. So returning then to the concrete, and because of the wind blow in on that west end, for the plans, I believe I actually showed it a little further than that, out where there's a 2-foot margin here. I continued to horse around with this though, and finally ended up saying, as you saw in those photos here, that I brought the concrete all the way out to here. The concrete people will have to advise you on that. Initially, when I was keeping it back here, some of that was based upon trying to keep it from becoming cracked at these little scraps in here, but the other part was this would become landscaped and buffer those off. I don't know which way is going to work out better, but I would urge you to discuss that with the concrete people. Here then is the little series of working with this beam, this conduit beam, and its interface with the end of this open end. I'm still showing the 1.5" cedar here, with this either going on top of it or dying against the back side of it. And I finally ended up thinking the best way to do this is just use a solid piece of 8x8 here with a beveled end and die that beam into it, and make this one as thick as these, so everything's 7 inches over here. You can't possibly see everything at once, so I think that's justified. And then this, of course, is the same width as those, 7 1/4 or so. And I actually have that block, that king post or whatever you want to pretend that is, flushed out with the surface of these, which are flushed out with the surface of these battens. I think that's probably the best way to address that. There's a little extra scrap here, ignore that. And my final drawings show it probably close to this. You can also see on this wall, you could do what you like here. I'm recommending this is a corner board combination bat, and I'm recommending that just be brought all the way up. And then these are all reclaimed battens here, and new substrate that looks like cedar underneath them. And I think that's about it. This is all reflected on the latest drawings, so if your final view on that differs, let me know and I can adjust them. Thanks.